Welcome in, brand new Tuesday Scramble for this week's Charles Schwab Challenge. It is May 24th, 2022. I'm Rick Gehman. That right there, Sia Najad. Sia filling in for Andy today. Much appreciate you hopping on and chatting with me.
Rick, big shoes to fill. Andy's awesome. You're awesome. This show is awesome. I'm super happy to be here. Can't wait to get started.
Yeah, Andy is very good. He told me like 6 weeks ago that he had a commitment this day. And then I forgot about it for 5.5 weeks. And then I said, oh crap, let me see who I can find. First text, Sia Najad. He responds 3 seconds and we are locked and loaded. It was the easiest booking I've ever done.
I mean, bells and alarms go off when you text me, Rick. It was like the bat signal. It was as if I knew it before it happened. But no, I appreciate you having me on.
All right, so we're going to spend the next amount of time on kind of the field for this week. We'll talk through props. We'll go through head-to-head matchups. We've got one-and-done selections. I do have Andy's one-and-done selection locked in, so we'll get to that later in the show. We are indeed presented by PrizePicks, so there is a link in the description. You can sign up, get your $100 instant deposit bonus. You can use the code RICK, and we are going to have 4 props coming later in the show, but I've got to debrief on this PGA Championship, Sia, what Justin Thomas did coming from 7 shots behind to kind of, I don't want to say steal the PGA Championship, but at some point it kind of felt that way.
You know what's funny? Little personal note here. I was so close to posting something on Twitter about how right I was about the wave stacks. And to a degree, I suppose I was. But because I had those wave stacks, I had Zalatoris, I had Mito, I had really all the guys that were contending on Sunday early afternoon. I'm so glad I didn't make that Twitter post because JT, who's on the wrong wave, Matt Fitzpatrick, who's on the wrong wave, just kind of storm through and take over the place. I genuinely, even looking back now, cannot believe that in the middle of Mito's round, he's 9 under, and that Justin Thomas is 1 under, and that somehow one of those guys passed the other. It like literally doesn't make sense to me, especially when you consider all the guys like Cameron Young and Will Zalatoris who were in front of Justin Thomas and who had been playing well for 3 full days. It's staggering, and it's really kind of the mark of a champion. When you can do that as Justin Thomas, it really kind of tells me something about kind of who you are and what you're made of on Sunday, even if you think you're out of it.
Yeah. And then realizing he's in the moment and just kind of taking it. He had that look about him. I'm glad you brought up the wave stuff because it ended up being a little less than 2 strokes different. And I still don't think it played out how a lot of people thought it was going to play out because if the wind, we were expecting on Friday afternoon that the wind would just get like 5 miles an hour lighter or like 7 miles an hour lighter. It completely flipped off. And then those guys went nuts for 9 holes and flipped the wave. But then, like you mentioned, basically 2 guys that were in the optimal lineup and the guy who won the golf tournament came from the wrong wave. This is so hard to do. Golf is so weird. It is so random. There are a million factors that we do not control. And you and I sit here every week and try to figure it out.
And that's the thing. I went all in on the wave stack and I feel sort of validated by how it turned out. It just so happens that, 2 guys who ended up, near the top 5, or actually Fitzpatrick was in the top 5, they just didn't care. And we know that about them, right? We know Matt Fitzpatrick is good in the weather and in tough conditions. And we've seen Justin Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was at the Players where he was in the wrong wave too and just kind of dominated on day 2. So it's just one of those things. But like at the same time, going back, if I had known that the wave stack, whatever, the wave advantage was going to play out like it did, which is what I thought it was going to be, I still wouldn't select Justin Thomas and Matt Fitzpatrick because I have a built-in edge there. So it's just one of those things. That's how good those guys played. They were able to overcome really tough breaks when it comes to the weather.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's bizarre. Looking at some of the guys that were in the heat of the battle last week, and I'm referring mostly to Mito Pereira, Will Zalatoris, Justin Thomas, they are all in the field this week. It's 250 miles from Tulsa to Fort Worth, so it's not a travel issue, but level of confidence going back to some of these guys for one more go around.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit on our DFS show yesterday on the first cut. I don't have a super high level of confidence, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to play them. I think the one that I have more confidence in, and I think this is going to be a surprise to most people, is Justin Thomas. I just thought the way that things unfolded for him, I don't think he really had the pressure that Mito and Zalatoris did throughout that Sunday. I don't think Justin Thomas really thought he was going to win the tournament. I think he thought, let me just get a strong finish in here. I'm playing really well. And long story short, he just sort of like ended up in a playoff because the field came back to him. So yeah, I mean, I understand what we talked about earlier, like the media obligations and just the notion of winning and how that might affect you going into the next week. But I just don't know that would affect a guy like JT as much as it might somebody else.
Part of me thinks these guys are just professionals and they're all so good. And Mito might be looking at it as a chance to not be thinking about the PGA Championship, just like go out and play golf and get a clean start. And Zalatoris played great. He should be garnering a lot of confidence. And JT, listen, when you've won, 14 times now, something like that on the PGA Tour, doing some media obligations on Sunday night, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe these guys are just going to continue to rock and roll.
Yeah, what's interesting about Zalatoris though, his accuracy was really off on Sunday, almost throughout his 18. And I wonder, I mean, obviously that just could have been pressure and whatnot, but do we see a little bit? I mean, we know what we saw from Mito on 18. I mean, I'm not super worried about that. I don't really know what happened there. I think that was just a tough moment for him. But as far as Zalatoris is concerned, I wonder if some of that filters or spills over to, day one or day two of this tournament. But I am a little nervous to play both of them. In fact, if I was going to fade one of the two, it would be Zalatoris over Mito in terms of fading somebody.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we're going to talk about it in the props segment, because I think if there is a bit of a hangover, you'll notice it early. You'll notice it in round one, over 72 holes. I think that it starts to figure itself out, but I think there might be an edge or two early. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Sia. I'm so used to saying Andy. Sia, we have to talk about this Charles Schwab Challenge field, which is impressively deep. We are going to do that, but first, we're going to take a quick 30 seconds. I've recently started using Juice Reel as a way to track all my bets in real time. Since I can sync the app to all my sports books, I don't miss any wager, and I've learned a ton more about my betting habits. There are built-in line shopping features, so I know that I'm always getting the best lines available, and once the game starts, I can see the value of my bets fluctuate in real time with the scoring so that I always have an understanding of my expected value. The performance analytics have made me much more knowledgeable about the bets that I have the most success at, hint, top 10s, and there's no going back for me. Download the Juice Reel app with the link in the description. All right, Sia, we are rocking and rolling to Fort Worth. We mentioned it's close, and I mean, look at this field: JT, Scotty Scheffler, Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, Will Zalatoris. I mean, it is fairly stacked at the top. I think we are now getting to the point where these golfers are so good at their routine, and it's not like the normal, well, I'm just going to take the week off before a major championship. These guys play a lot more, it feels like.
Yeah, they do. They do. And I wonder, why is that, Rick? Do you think that's just because, they're chasing the FedEx Cup title? We got a big pot of gold at the end? Because I'm surprised by this, to be honest with you. It wouldn't surprise me if you had a few headliners, but to have all of these guys, this field, obviously it's not as deep as the PGA Championship, but it kind of feels like it is when you look at like the first, 7 or 8 names here.
I do think that they say, wow, there's another $8.5 million on the line this week, and I can win my share of it. I like playing golf. I was probably going to play golf this week anyway. I might as well do it in competition. I just think that they are so much more in tune with recovery, and they're so much more in tune with what you said, like that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the FedEx Cup, which is getting jacked up year in and year out. It's a huge incentive. And we started seeing that when guys started playing in the fall. Remember, there was a time where none of the studs played until January, until the Tournament of Champions. And then they would start there and they'd be like, man, I'm already 1,500 points behind, or I've already missed out on a quarter of the schedule. I should start playing those events. And I just think you're seeing it get more and more competitive, because if you think about it, in an ideal world, like 50 years from now, Sia, if these guys can figure it out, they should never take a week off. right? If they could
Yeah.
optimize their performance to play at a high level 48 times a year, they should do that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's technology and recovery and advancement in health stuff, but like that would be the end goal.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point. And I don't know the details behind who are on sort of people's staff, but I do know that we know a lot of people are sort of taking their bodies differently across all sports, and golf should be no different. So in terms of treatment and rest and what you're putting into your body and the amount of exercise you're doing, granted, not every golfer, I mean, we can tell by looking at some of these guys that they're not necessarily like hitting the gym or minding what they're eating. But I think a lot of them are. And I think that's a big difference why you were seeing a lot of players, because they trust their bodies now because of how they're being taken care of by the people that are around them.
Yeah, and you look at the top of the board here. So JT obviously back in action. Scotty Scheffler coming off of a miscut. Jordan Spieth, who has crushed at Colonial. Colin Morikawa. I mean, it's absolutely awesome. There is a kind of a clear gap to me. I think it's maybe after Sam Burns. There's like a top 8 or 9 in this field, and then you get into the Billy Horschels, Kevin Na, Jason Kokrak's of the world.
Mhm.
But when you combine the top heaviness of this board plus the great course history, the fact that we've played here every year for 75 years, it creates a situation where so many guys are live and so many guys are interesting, even like a Ryan Palmer. It's like, well, Ryan Palmer's a member here. Or it's like, Gary Woodland. Well, Gary Woodland's got 2 top 15 finishes here. Like you could make a case, I feel like this week, for so many different golfers.
Yeah, and add to the fact that unlike the PGA Championship, I mean, I don't know that length was super important at the PGA Championship, but it's certainly not important here. I mean, this is definitely a positional golf course. So, like forgetting about the history, that sort of brings almost the whole field into it in and of itself. But then to your point, you've got a lot of guys that are maybe kind of in that lower rung that have really good history here or might just grade out well. It's going to be, and I think that's why that if you, especially in DraftKings, if you really like somebody, I think it's really important to kind of stick with that and not get group thought into, hey, everybody's talking about this guy, let me take him. I think this is a really good tournament to pivot because there are so many guys in play that have upside, especially in that 7 and 8K range. So if everybody's on, I don't know, just I'll name somebody like Taylor Gooch, for example, or Webb Simpson or Tommy Fleetwood. Listen, I like Tommy Fleetwood a lot too. We'll talk about him a little bit later in this show, but if he's going to be 16% or something like that, I'm happy to go to a 7 or 8% guy and take my chances.
Speaking of Webb Simpson, there was a question from Mark about Webb Simpson. He says, is it possible that Webb Simpson is back after a long neck injury, played well enough last week for a T20 finish? So just to kind of get everybody up to speed on Webb, he took that time off from, I'll look it up here, but he took like a month or 2 off. And this neck injury goes back to like last year. Remember, he withdrew from the Wells Fargo Championship. And you're like, holy crap, that's like in his backyard. Like that's a little bit nerve wracking. So he took the time off from Sony to the Players. So that was 2 months. And then when he came back, he wasn't good. I mean, he just wasn't playing well. He was making cuts. He was finishing like 30th to 60th. This was his best finish, Sia, and he gained across the board at the PGA Championship. So is there a little bit of hope that what we're seeing from Webb moving forward is closer to what we are used to seeing from Webb?
So a couple things here. We don't have enough of a sample size to say, oh yeah, this is definitely, indicating that he's definitely on the rise. But I will say this. I don't know if you noticed this, Rick, but he looked so spry, especially on Saturday and Sunday. Like where, he let's say he made a long putt and he just kind of like galloped to the ball and picked it up real quick. And I'm not saying that that's not like that means he's not injured. I'm just saying like he felt, it felt like he was like, man, I'm back now. Like I'm feeling really good. And that to me speaks to, he's got confidence in his health. So if the question is he back or is he not back? I'm falling in the camp of he is back, even though we don't have a ton of evidence to support that.
I don't know if he's back or not. I'm trying to share my screen here. So this is RickRunGood.com. So I don't know if he's back, but I will say when I see a stat profile like this, which is not a lot of good play, not a lot of horrible play either. I mean, it's just the fact that he hasn't been putting well is kind of, I guess, at least a little bit encouraging. But when I see this first sign of return, right? Which is like, okay, he gained across the board. I am much more willing to try to be early and say, okay, I'll go now. Like, let me try to catch Webb right now this week on a course that asks for more accuracy than distance. Let me try to be early now. And if he goes back to, I don't know, what we saw at the RBC Heritage and he doesn't putt well and he finishes 59th, I don't feel that bad about it. But what's going to happen is if he wins this, now we're going to have a lot of different conversations about Webb, and I'd rather be early than late.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't know how much Webb I'm going to have in DFS this week, but I'll definitely speculate a little bit on him because I agree with you that this is a situation, and this is another thing we talked about yesterday was, let's say Bryson plays. Like, it's too early to go in on Bryson. I don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, I want to be early on Bryson because there's just no evidence that that's going to work out. But with Webb, you can still be early from an ownership percentage standpoint, and it can definitely work out in your favor.
This is a stat profile that is like reminiscent of like Anirban Lahiri finding something, of Davis Riley finding something. The other thing is that Webb is historically a much better player than both of those guys. So it's at least a little bit something to be optimistic about. Let's continue this conversation with props. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into PrizePicks. We're going to look at that board. We are going to offer up 4 props for round 1. The code you're looking for is Rick. There's a link in the description. You can sign up. You can get all situated. We are going to jump into those on the other side. Big news. I recently launched RunGoodProps.com, which is the ultimate PrizePicks assistant. It allows you to quickly reference hundreds of props across a bunch of different sports to determine which are the biggest favorites. Then you take those over to PrizePicks to build entries where you actually have an edge. That's right. Since PrizePicks treats every prop like it's even money and with guaranteed payouts, the expected value calculator literally shows you that you have an advantage by going through this process. This is the way to make the most money on prop entries. If you're playing on PrizePicks and not using RunGoodProps.com, you're leaving money on the table. RunGoodProps.com to sign up. You won't regret it. Let's prop it like it's hot here. Sia, we've got 4 props over at PrizePicks for round 1. So what is currently available right now? Strokes, birdies or better, greens in regulation, fairways hit, and they've been doing this since last week. They're calling it birdies or better matchup, which I have a lot of thoughts about this. So these are basically head-to-head matchups, but the winner is the one who makes more birdies or better. So for example, there is one that is Scottie Scheffler versus Victor Hovland, and the line is set at 0. So if you think Scottie is going to make more birdies or better than Victor Hovland in round 1, you take the over. If you believe Victor Hovland is going to make more birdies or better than Scottie Scheffler, you take the under. That's how those work. Now, a couple of things on this, Sia. I applaud PrizePicks for being very innovative. Creative, right? So this is dangerously close to a head-to-head matchup that you would get offered by a sports book that they are probably not legally allowed to do. There is also the holes played prop that they had last week, which is essentially to make the cut wagers, which they are probably not allowed to do. This is, I'll give it to them. It's pretty genius. I love it.
So some people know I'm an attorney sort of by trade, or at least I practiced for some time. This is what attorneys do. I mean, it truly is. You know, you have your creative team at PrizePicks, and they're like, well, we want to do this, but we can't do this. And the attorney on staff, you know, in-house counsel says, all right, well, let's figure out how we can do this. And frankly, this is perfectly legal. It's perfectly appropriate. Yes, it simulates gambling to some degree, but you can make the same argument about DFS and a lot of other things. So this is towing the line in the same way that so many other things that we currently do are also towing the line. So I don't have a problem with it from a quote legal standpoint. I think it's super creative and innovative, Rick, and I assume they're going to have more offerings in this regard in the future.
Well, that's what I love about this is you can really kind of if you can get creative, you can do a lot of stuff. It's like when they used to have instead of strokes, they used to call it fantasy score, but the way that you you earned fantasy points was to take 1 stroke, and you would get 1 point for that. So it was literally equivalent to strokes, but they were like, oh no, that's fantasy score. This is completely different. It's something completely else, which I love. All right, Armina, release the props, please. Let's see. There they are. All right. So see, we've got 4 props for round 1 over at PrizePicks for this week's Charles Schwab Challenge. You have honed in on the greens in regulation props. Start by giving us your first one, please.
So I'll go Tommy Fleetwood over 11.5 greens in regulation. And Rick, the big ticket item there is just how good Tommy Fleetwood has been, particularly. And granted, we don't have a huge sample size of him having, being great on both approach and off the tee at the same time, but he is continuing to gain with the ball striking, and particularly on approach. So he gained 4.72 on approach last week, 2.06 the week prior, and he's just been very solid on approach, where we didn't really see that from him, let's say, 5-6 months ago. So I'm very encouraged by that. We could talk about the short game play, but again, that's not going to come in with the greens in regulation. I just think off the tee, being a positional course, he's going to keep it in the fairway, and he's going to hit the green more often than not.
Yeah, Armina, I'm going to try to steal this back here. Let's see if this works. There we go. Okay, so yeah, look at these approach numbers the last couple of weeks. First of all, he gained across the board at the PGA Championship, but gained nearly 5 strokes on approach. He gained at the Byron Nelson. He gained at the RBC Heritage. He gained at the match play. So he's gained on approach in 6 of 7 measured events. I'll give it up. Tommy's been very, very good. And what we saw him do at the PGA Championship, you're going to get similar sized greens this week, but they're not going to be as repelling as the greens were at Southern Hills. They're going to be a little bit more receptive. And see, as you might know, when you start doing the greens in regulation props, and you see guys on the fringe or very close, it's like, it's such a sweat. It's such a sweat.
Yeah. And side note there, he was T4 or tied for 4th in terms of hitting greens in regulation last week at the PGA Championship.
Love it. I'm going Sungjae Im under 68 strokes. So this is kind of a weird situation where Sungjae withdrew from the PGA Championship, withdrew from the KPGA event the week prior to that, because he tested positive for COVID. But if you get good version of Sungjae, which is what we've been seeing, especially in the ball striking categories, like that's only 2 under par, right? 68's 2 under. His metrics were great at the Masters. His metrics were great at Heritage. He finished 14th at the Zurich Classic with Ben on. I think just because we haven't seen Sungjae, I think this prop is a little bit off because there's a lot of questions, but he's been out there swinging. He's been posting it on Instagram. He's getting the game in shape. Like I'm not worried about any rust from Sungjae.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit of a leap of faith just because we haven't seen him, but it does set up really nicely for Sungjae. So if he is, if he's out there on, I guess, today and Wednesday and he's doing his thing and there doesn't look to be any issue, I kind of love this. So I'm all aboard.
Back to another green regulation prop for you, Sia, and this is for Max Homa, who I love. I'm in. Give me the next 6 months of Max Homa. I'm a buyer.
Yeah, I hear you. So, Tommy Fleetwood was 11.5. I think if it was 12.5, I would have been a little shy about it. But Max Homa's being 12.5, I'm not shy about. I mean, so the thing with Max Homa as of late, what's sort of plagued him is that around the green game, which of course is not going to come into play when it comes to hitting over 12.5 greens in regulation. I mean, look at this as we look at it on YouTube. Look at this off the tee and approach game. I mean, he's gained ball striking 8 tournaments in a row. And it's not just like, yeah, he's kind of gained here, kind of gained there. I mean, look at the approach play, 6.93, 4.26. We go down a little bit, 3.35, 3.94, 5.70. I mean, he is absolutely dominating on approach. And that's the exact type of thing you are going to need here to pepper over 12.5 greens in regulation.
That stretch that you refer to, he is statistically an equivalent ball striker of Victor Hovland. That is how good he's been, and no real signs of that slowing down. I couldn't resist one of these birdie or better matchups. Sia, I'm in on this. So I took JT under 0 birdies or better in a matchup against Sam Burns. So essentially Burns to make more birdies or better than JT in round 1. Number 1, Sam Burns is a great birdie maker. He might give it back with bogeys. Doesn't matter here. right? I don't care. Go out and make yourself some birdies. If we are going to see any hangover effects, you will see them in round one. So I think this is a nice little opportunity. I think if JT plays great this week, but I think this is a little opportunity to kind of steal one from him.
I agree about the spike potential of Sam Burns. In fact, I like him quite a bit in DFS, in spite of the fact that he can sometimes be erratic on approach, but you're able to sort of, play that Justin Thomas narrative into this matchup as well. But either way, if that narrative didn't exist, I don't mind this play for Sam Burns. So I'm all aboard here too. Sam Burns is definitely going to be in a decent amount of my DFS lineups as well.
Thomas under 0 birdies or better matchup. Sungjae Im under 68 strokes. Max Homa over 12.5 greens in regulation. Tommy Fleetwood over 11.5 greens in regulation. Round one, PrizePicks props. The code is Rick. The link is in the description. We've got to get to matchups. We've got to get to one and done selections. We are going to do both of those things after this break. If you're not playing daily fantasy on PrizePicks, then you're not really playing daily fantasy. They offer nothing but props, and they do it better than anyone else. You pick 2 to 5 players on an over-under and can win up to 10 times on any entry. They allow mixed sport entries, meaning you can take the over on LeBron James and the under on Jon Rahm. The golf-specific props are amazing. Birdies or better, fairways hit, greens in regulation, round score, and now, yes, single hole props. That's right. What score will a golfer make on a specific hole? I have PrizePicks specific tools on my website to help you build the best entries, and now PrizePicks is offering a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. Just use the code RICK at sign up or click the link in the description. That's code RICK. Good luck. Okay, Sia, before we jump into the matchups for this week, what is your favorite DraftKings contest to play in? We have you on mute.
I apologize. I'll basically play most of the single entries that are between, like, let's say $12 and $100. Sometimes I'll dip into like the 200 single entry, but yeah, I like the $33 single entries are two of the ones I click first. Like I've already kind of entered those. So I don't know the names of them, Rick, but
I don't know the names either.
Yeah, there's usually 233 single entry contests that I click right away. One has a bigger prize pool than the others, and then I'll eat up the $12 ones, maybe a few of the $15 3 max, and then I'll go to the 100 SCs and sometimes the 200 SC. But I'll tell you this, Rick, I play a lot more cash games now than I used to, and it's really been profitable in the sense of maintaining my bankroll when I crash and burn with some of the tournaments.
Which is certainly possible when so last week I think it was either in the 100 or the 33 because I also like the single entry ones where it was Zalatoris, Davis Riley, Mito Pereira. So first of all, I'm like rocking and rolling already.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was Luke List, Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland. And when you look at a lineup that is being dragged down by Colin Morikawa and Victor Hovland, and you've got Mito at the top. Now, it didn't end up, when it was Zalatoris and Mito tied for the lead and Davis Riley was right there, JT kind of snuck up and stole the thing. But don't you just hate it when your most expensive best guys are the ones that are underperforming?
Yeah, that was also me last week because of sort of the wave stack and some of the guys that I liked. I also had a lot of Zalatoris, I had a lot of Mito, and I had a little bit of Cameron Young. And they were, going into Sunday, I was like, well, all I need for, I'm talking about referring to more than one lineup, but all I need is Jordan Spieth and or Rory McIlroy to make a charge, not only make birdies, but, finish in the top 10, for example. And those were the guys that ultimately held me back on Saturday and Sunday. It's really interesting. And it kind of speaks to something we talk about sometimes when we do our DFS show, that it's not always the guys at the top that are going to bring you home. You don't always have to play those guys there. If you want to build a balanced lineup and start in the 9K or the, upper 9K range, and then you just go with 8K guys and maybe one 7K guy, that's perfectly acceptable in this day and age where you have so much talent that is just under that elite tier.
The optimal lineup last week: Justin Thomas, Will Zalatoris, Cam Young, Mito Pereira, Tommy Fleetwood, Chris Kirk. Very reasonable. The top 4 alone I had in spread out over a lot of single entries: JT, Zalatoris, Young, Mito. And Fleetwood has been great. And Chris Kirk's been like, I'm actually a little bit surprised nobody had it. It left 1,600 on the table, which is probably why nobody had it, but that is about as reasonable as you can get.
Yeah, it's almost shocking that nobody had that when you consider some of these big contests. I listen, Kirk at 6,900 last week. If you just looked at his ball striking, it was so good, and the putter was kind of off and on. The around the green game was fine with Kirk. He made so much sense. Fleetwood, I didn't play last week. I kind of wish I did, but yeah, that lineup is. Yeah, that's the thing. When you make some lineups, if it makes sense to you, play it. Doesn't matter if there's, granted, you don't want to leave 1,600 on the table typically, but the point is if the lineup makes sense to you, don't change it because you have 600 left. Just roll with that lineup that already made sense to you.
Just roll with it. Head-to-head matchups. Andy and I last week were both 2-3. So Sia, you and I are going to beat that this week. First matchup, Abraham Ancer versus Taylor Gooch. We are in a consensus on this one. Who have we chosen?
Yeah, we've chosen Taylor Gooch. This one was really close. I was so close to choosing Abraham Ancer. I ended up going with Gooch just because I think we're finally starting to, I shouldn't say we're finally starting to see, other than the AT&T Byron Nelson, he's been really good. He's been a top 25 machine. I think Ancer is kind of like a safe-ish play when it comes to DFS or maybe fitting him into like the top 40 or top 20 market. But I think Gooch has a little bit more upside. And so that's what I chose to go with here. But I got to tell you, the margins were super close here.
Yeah, I'm just not, I don't know, man. I'm not really a buyer on Ancer. I'm not really a buyer on Finau. These are just guys that not red flags, but I just see like a lot of yellow flags with. I think this is a better spot for Ancer than it is for Finau, obviously, with the way that they play and having to play out of the fairway being so critical at Colonial. But yeah, Gooch he's had like one bad start in a long time. So I'm willing to cut him some slack and say Gooch gets right back at it. Daniel Berger versus Tommy Fleetwood. This on paper, I think, is very easy to just take Tommy Fleetwood, which is what we have both done. But we've got to talk about Berger here. Here's his metrics, Sia. For a guy who was one of the best approach players for a year to have done this, -2 at the Players, -5 at the Match Play, -3 at the Masters, hit it well at the RBC Heritage, loses another 3 on approach at the PGA Championship. What do we even make of this?
So let's not forget, and I'm trying to remember when it started. It was 3 or 4 months ago where we started to hear, Berger, I think, was withdrawing from a tournament or two. And again, this is very recent history. So I'm sorry I forgot, but I guess he had the rib injury, and then maybe he also had a wrist injury, but he was dealing with some things. And we know how golf works, right? We don't find out about like a Harris English back injury until after he's good again last year. And he's like, oh, he just casually references it.
Oh yeah. Those 6 tournaments I stunk, I had a back injury.
Yeah. So sorry for all your, ball striking metrics about me, but it turns out like I wasn't going to be able to hit the ball flush at all. So that's the thing with Berger. I think maybe he's still trying to work through something and we just kind of don't know it yet. And he's just trying to tough it out, if you will, as opposed to take a month or 2 off. Again, that's highly speculative, but I don't know how to explain this. We know we have a recent injury that he was dealing with that took him out of a couple of tournaments, a pre-tournament withdrawal. And we know he's been pretty bad ever since. So I'm just trying to put 2 and 2 together here.
We are both on Tommy Fleetwood. And I will keep a close eye on Daniel Berger and see what happens. Next up, Sam Burns versus Max Homa. This is where we split. There will be blood here. Sia, what side would you like?
Yeah, I guess give me Sam Burns. This was another close one. I really like both of these guys. And I think, again, I keep referring to DFS, but I think you can start a lineup if you want to with both of these guys. I think they're like 9,700 and 9,400 respectively. But I like them both. I just think the upside with Sam Burns is a little more. I think these guys both cruise through the cut. I think they're great ball strikers. Max Homa has certainly been a little bit more consistent, particularly with the ball striking and on approach. But again, it's Sam Burns, and just weighing Sam Burns versus Max Homa, I think Burns has a little bit more win potential. And so that's kind of what I'm working with here.
Yeah, these are 2 of my guys. Producer Mina put me in a blender trying to decide between these 2. I opted for Max Homa. Again, the ball striking numbers are insane. He is putting well. He's playing with a lot of confidence. The trajectory for Max Homa for 4 years has been nothing but up and to the right. Incremental improvement, seemingly week in and week out. I think this is what, you look at some of the spots that he's won. I mean, TPC Potomac was pretty demanding off the tee. This is not going to be that demanding, but listen, you're going to have to find the fairway. And the worst part of Homa's game around the green, we're going to talk about it in a second with Victor Hovland. I don't think it matters that much this week. I think there's a lot of easy spots. I think you can get around just fine. Jason Kokrak won this losing 2 strokes around the green last year. So not so worried about that. Give me Homa here.
And it's worth noting that even though Sam Burns is more expensive than Max Homa in DraftKings, they're actually flipped when it comes to the odds board. I'm seeing Max Homa at 30-1 as an outright winner and Sam Burns as 35-1. Although, let me double check that. No, 25-1 versus 30-1. So yeah, Max Homa is still the favorite, but he's 5 points better than the guy who's more expensive than him in DraftKings.
Couple of big boppers here. Will Zalatoris versus Victor Hovland is next. I have no problem going back to Zalatoris here, but I have opted for Victor. And Sia, if you know me, I bet on Victor every single week. It's just part of my card. And so I don't always necessarily have to say, oh, this is a good or bad week for Victor Hovland. I think this is a good week for him. I think this is a course that should magnify his strengths and should kind of eliminate his weaknesses. Like the bunkers are very easy to get out of. The thick rough around the green is good for guys that are not great around the greens, which Victor will tell you he's not, and that the rough stuff is better for him. I think it's a great spot for him.
It's a great spot for him. I mean, he might actually make an appearance later on before this show is out. Listen, I mean, I could speak to the approach numbers, but everybody knows he's a great ball striker, especially with approach where he's gained 7 in a row. But if you go back even further, it's not like then there's like 3 bad ball striking before the 7 I just referenced. Like he's constantly gaining on approach. You're right. The around the green game, which you pointed out, Rick, wasn't even that bad last week at the PGA Championship. He actually gained
the guy who was supposed to chip himself out of a major didn't chip himself out of a major. It was actually better than field average. Interesting, Sia.
Yeah, well, by the way, what's funny, I if you recall, my best bet that we did on one of the preview shows for the PGA Championship was Jordan Spieth over Victor Hovland, and I really didn't give him too much of a hard time around the green. I just like Jordan Spieth so much, but Jordan Spieth barely edged out Victor Hovland. They finished +4, and then Hovland ended up being +5. So that was certainly a sweat. But yeah, I like Victor Hovland a lot. I think we might be reintroduced to Victor Hovland. I feel like every few months we sort of forget about either Colin Morikawa or Victor Hovland, and then we're like, oh yeah, they're so good because they win a tournament or do something incredible.
Star Lord's dad says Victor's putting was horrible last week.
No, it wasn't.
I would like to have a horrible putter that is basically field average. -0.18, not even a quarter of a stroke over 4 rounds. And he's historically a very good putter. There are a lot of arguments you could make statistically against Victor. That is not one of them.
So what that person saw was Victor Hovland's round 3. He clearly just watched Saturday's coverage, because that round he actually lost 3 strokes putting, and then he was a small loser around round 4, -0.58. But rounds 1 and 2 he gained well over 3 strokes. So again, he was a horrible putter on Saturday. Every other day he was pretty great.
Victor is going to win this. I'm kind of sure about it. As sure as I can be on a Tuesday morning with 8 top 20 players in the world and golf being as random as it is. I'm as sure as I can be in that moment.
Well, I'm glad you prefaced it with that, because golf is super weird, but I agree with you. I think I don't want to say this is Victor Hovland's tournament to win, but I do like Victor Hovland a lot.
Breaking news.
Ooh. Can I guess? I knew it. I was going to guess that. I swear. Bryson DeChambeau has withdrawn from the tournament.
Bryson DeChambeau has withdrawn from the Charles Schwab Challenge. Dealing with lingering wrist/hand surgery. I think it's actually wrist surgery, but they go in through the hand, which gives me the skeevies. Sia, that is, I'm not good with blood. I'm not good with needles. I'm not good with any of that stuff. Not great.
We're in the same camp there. I'm not good with that stuff either at all.
I had my gallbladder removed, and the terrifying part was like just knock me out already. Like, I don't want to be. The worst part was giving me the anesthesia, not like everything that comes after.
I get it.
Okay, so Bryson's out, which we knew was possible, and we talked about this as well. Like, he went to Southern Hills and played 3 practice rounds This is basically at home for him. This is a home game for him. He lives in Dallas. So there was no risk to him at least trying. Now, I don't know if he was on site this week, but this is an earlier WD than we saw from the PGA Championship. So now we are back towards maybe the next time we see Bryson being the Memorial, which would be next week.
Right. Which I tend to think he's not going to play that one either. I mean, I mean, I'm just speculating, of course, but I think maybe it's time for him to maybe not practice for a couple weeks, and just kind of shut it down and just let things heal and then resume practice in 2 to 3 weeks. Because, again, I'm not a doctor, but like the more you're practicing, the more you're trying it out, the more you're potentially aggravating, this sort of precise wrist/hand injury. And it just seems to me that, hey, let's just check out for a few weeks and then reevaluate.
Armina just sent me a message on Slack. She said, I am a doctor and I agree. So you've got an endorsement there.
Nice.
I had something else about this. Oh, do you want to wildly speculate?
Yes.
If we're going to wildly speculate, there's a great
asked.
little conspiracy theory going around right now with Bubba Watson. So Bubba Watson tweeted out, I guess after the PGA Championship, I think it was Monday, that he has a torn meniscus and he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks, which is like in line with the Live Golf event. So it would basically be like, oh yeah, you shot a 63 or whatever at the PGA Championship on a torn meniscus, and now you're just out for 4 to 6 weeks with injury. It's not like, hey, I played my big major championship and now I'm going to come back and the next time you ever see me is going to be in London at this Live Golf event. What do you think about that little conspiracy?
I think it's a decent theory. And I think if you have a torn meniscus and you're putting that much sort of torque and pressure on your knee, I think we'd probably see him grimace here and there. At some point in rounds 1, 2, 3, and especially 4, I think we would probably see something, evidencing a torn meniscus. I mean, it's not necessarily a slight injury unless it's a very slight tear. Again, that the meniscus thing sounded super weird to me. As well as he played and as healthy as he looked, it sounded super weird to me.
All right. Sia is in on this conspiracy theory. I love it. Final matchup. The biggest boys in the field. Justin Thomas, Scotty Scheffler. Scotty missed the cut at the PGA Championship. Obviously, Justin Thomas won it. Quite different results. You have opted to go right back to JT, Sia. I have not. I've opted for Scotty Scheffler here. So let's make the case for JT.
So this is more of a play on just I'm in the sort of anti-psychology camp in terms of like JT's just not going to be the regular JT after a major win. And I think he is. Now, that doesn't mean he's necessarily going to beat Scotty Scheffler. Maybe in the back of my mind, I wanted to be a little different from you, Rick, because we agreed on so much. But honestly, I think it's a coin flip between these guys. We know Scotty Scheffler's history here isn't great. We know he's coming in. Obviously, he's coming in with good form. But, he didn't play great last week, even though he was in the bad wave. And JT's been really great. I mean, if you're just sizing up the metrics, I mean, JT's certainly comparable to Scotty Scheffler. And so if we're looking at histories and things of that nature, I think JT's a fine play here over Scotty.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the fact that JT only has 1 win this year is just silliness, but at least he's got one. I'm just trying to buy low here. I think that Scotty's miscut last week, as you mentioned, was on the wrong side of it. This is about as good of a miscut as you can get. I mean, looking at the advanced metric, so he gains 2.5 strokes on approach in 2 rounds. He loses 1 off the tee, less than 1 around the green, and 1 with the putter. I could not script a better missed cut from a top tier player that I could just forget about. Like, that's what it would look like.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing in JT's camp, if we're looking at super recent history, I mean, obviously on approach, these guys can both absolutely spike and absolutely crush it. But JT's putter has been really good. Not just last week where he gained over 6 strokes, but over 3 the week before that. He was a gainer the week before that, over almost 3 the week before that. So maybe he's found something there. And Scotty can be a great putter too. But if I'm going to give somebody the edge when it comes to recent history and the putter, I'd give that edge to JT.
Well, our friend and colleague, Greg Ducharme, has been all over this because JT made a putter switch. It's got a longer neck. It's a little bit different. And it basically aligned directly with this great putting stuff. And when JT starts rolling balls in the cut, like that's basically why I'm so surprised he hadn't won before this, is he played so well. He had these great putting weeks. It just hadn't resulted in a win. And then he kind of steals one that maybe he shouldn't have won, right? With that, with like the percentage, the probability of coming from 7 shots back. It's well deserved, but it's just shocking that that was the first one.
Yeah, I agree. And, again, the history here is better than Scotty's, which doesn't mean much. It's only 2 years of history, but he does have a top 10 here in 2020. So it's something to be said for that.
I'll take Scheffler. Sia takes JT. One and done. Quick update for those keeping track at home. Last week, Andy had Jordan Spieth. I had Hideki Matsuyama. Spieth got 61,607. Hideki got 26,125. Basically nothing for either of us. 4.2 million for Andy. Although I'm charging $3 million for me. We've got, I think, 12 or 13 events to go. I have Andy's selection for this week, Sia, but I want to talk through kind of strategy here because we are in the last, I guess, like third of the season, which I think for most people who are listening, the biggest advice is to play your position, right? Like if you are front run, take the favorites, don't do anything stupid. If you have to make up ground, get a little creative, find a high ceiling golfer. So I believe we are at the point where playing your position is almost more important than playing your player.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to win, you can't take sort of the obvious guy that the leader also has left. So, in the first cut one and done where I'm doing laughably bad, it's one of those things where, there was like a 3-week stretch where I was just trying to be different. And, I ended up picking the wrong guy, but I didn't really care because I was coming from a place where like I kind of had to be a little bit different. So yeah, I agree with the sentiment there.
When you're behind, and I've got entries that are like this too, you take the risk of getting more behind because you're taking guys that are the second tier down, but that's kind of like to bring on great rewards, you must take on great risk, right? I mean, it's kind of the deal. I think objectively, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I like who you've gone with, but I think objectively the play is Jordan Spieth. Like if you had everyone available, you have a guy who's won in his last 3 starts, has a runner-up finish in his last 3 starts, and has dominated at the course you are going to. I think in a vacuum, Jordan Spieth is the guy.
Is the history here for Jordan comparable to what we might see with like Webb at Wyndham? Because this is absurd what he's doing here.
It is absurd. I could look it up. It's got to be pretty close. Like there's some other ones like Hideki at Phoenix for a while was really good. I'm trying to think. I mean, even like Spieth at the Masters, Charlie Hoffman in San Antonio. Those are like the elite of the elite course histories, and this definitely falls into that category.
Yeah, and you brought up a stat earlier this week when you were talking about how Spieth does with the putter on this course too, because we know the downfall for Spieth as of late has been the putter, and it's been kind of really, really bad. But his history here with the putter, correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty great, right?
Yeah, it's his best putting course. He's gained more strokes putting at Colonial than anywhere else, and you can see that's kind of the one aspect that he's been missing. Also, we did the first cut earlier, and Kyle Porter made an interesting comment about if you just flipped these results, if you flipped the PGA Championship and the Byron Nelson, and he went win 34th runner-up finish, people would be foaming at the mouth to get access to Jordan Spieth this week, which I'm not. Maybe they are, but not as crazy.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So in a vacuum, I think it's Jordan Spieth, which let me tell you is who I picked this week because I have him available. So, I went with Jordan Spieth. Andy went with Webb Simpson, who we talked about earlier. And Sia, you have chosen who for this week?
I've chosen Viktor Hovland. Again, he's one of the best in the world. He's a great ball striker. The around the green game isn't going to be a big issue with him. He excels in pretty much every other area. I think Viktor Hovland is a great play. I expect him to be there down the stretch on Sunday.
So do I. So do I. That thick stuff around the greens. If he does miss greens, it's easier to get up and down from. And of course, I say this now, like watch he'll gain a quarter of a stroke at Southern Hills around the green, and he'll lose like 3 here. And I'll be like, oh crap, that stunk. But I agree with you, man. Victor is, I think this is one of the better spots for him, and a lot of spots set up well for him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Spieth for myself. Andy has gone with Webb Simpson. Sia Nejad has gone with Victor Hovland. That is the one and done for this week. Sia, any final thoughts before we get out of here? I think this is going to be a fun one, dude. I think we're rocking and rolling.
That's the thing. I think there is a little like misconception about what this tournament is because it's the week after a major. Just look at the roster. Look at the lineup of guys that are playing here. This is a real big time tournament. It's a super talented field. And from a DFS and betting standpoint, I think there's a lot to look forward to. Like whether you're looking at the top 40 market or top 20 market or in DFS, like there's so many sort of different pivots. There's probably going to be a lot of flat ownership sort of across the board because there's so many popular guys, for example, in the 7K range, in the 9K range. You can kind of do what you want. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting.
Here's this 5-week stretch that we're in. PGA Championship, this field at Colonial. Next week is the Memorial, which is a $12 million purse that you know is going to get a lot of big names. Then we go back to Canada for the Canadian Open for the first time in 2 years, in which Rory has just committed to. And then we go to the U.S. Open at Brookline. Like this 5-week stretch is so strong.
Yeah, no, this is like the stretch. Like, and by the way, after that, it's not like it falls off a cliff either. I mean, there's so much to look forward to just in the next like 2 to 3 months when it comes to golf. And that's the beauty of golf, right? It's a year-round sport. There's very few times. I mean, obviously, like around Christmas time or December, it's pretty flat. But even in the swing season, I certainly have fun. But basically, from February to September, it is on. It is completely, it's go zone, Rick. It is go zone.
It's go zone, baby. It's go zone. All right. A lot of fun. Big thanks to producer Mina on the 1s and 2s. Sia Nejad, fun as always, can be found on Twitter at Sia Nejad. You can find me at RickRunGood. Back for another Scramble Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern time, Rick Run Good YouTube channel. But until then, good luck.